the message they never forget. There's a message they'll never admit still echoes in their mind. Not the one you screamed in desperation. Not the one you typed out at 2 a.m. hoping they'd finally respond. It's the one you said with calm certainty. The one that didn't come from fear, but from truth. I loved you without asking for your walls to come down. I just wanted to be let in. That's the one. The one they didn't respond to. The one they shrugged off or met with silence. The one that felt like it went nowhere, but actually sank into the quietest corner of them. That message, it didn't bounce off their walls. It slipped through the cracks. And now, long after you've stopped waiting for them to understand, they do, but only in the silence that followed you. You see, avoidants are masters of pretending things don't matter, of convincing even themselves that they feel nothing, that your love was too much, too demanding, too emotional. But that's not what their body remembers. Their nervous system remembers safety. It remembers how you showed up, without forcing them to be someone they weren't ready to be. It remembers the weight of your last message, not because it was loud, but because it was final, because the way you said it. It wasn't begging. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't please change. It was love, with the door already closing behind it. And here's what most people don't realize. Avoidants don't process emotional impact when it happens. They push it aside. They compartmentalize. They label it as drama, or pressure, or neediness. But months later, in the stillness of being alone, in the quiet of a new relationship that doesn't feel quite right, in the moment when someone else asks for closeness, they remember. And not just the words, the feeling, that moment when you stood in front of them, not to be rescued, but to be real. And that message, it haunts them, because it wasn't meant to guilt them. It was meant to set you free, and it did. But it's the message that now lives in them, because they knew, even if only subconsciously, that you loved them from a place they couldn't meet. Not then, and they let you go anyway. This isn't a story about regret in the traditional sense. It's not about them chasing you down months later, with flowers and apologies. Most avoidants won't do that. Their shame runs deep. Their fear of vulnerability is louder than their longing. But their mind doesn't forget the one person who didn't demand their change and walked away anyway. Because that person, you left something behind. Not bitterness, not confusion, but truth. And the nervous system doesn't forget truth. Your words settled where their armor was weakest, not in their logic, but in their body. And the irony? They couldn't handle your closeness, but now they carry your message with them, like a ghost. Why it hits them later, not during. Avoidants don't feel the weight of a message when it's handed to them. They feel it when it's missing. They don't react to your truth in the moment you offer it, because that would require presence. And presence, for the avoidant, is often the most threatening thing of all. See, when you said, "I loved you, I just wanted to be let in," they weren't fully there to receive it. Not emotionally, not psychologically. They heard it, sure. They even maybe rolled their eyes or told you, "You're too sensitive." But that wasn't rejection. That was defense. That was someone trying to escape the discomfort of being seen. Avoidants don't run from you. They run from what you make them feel. And love, real, grounding, vulnerable love, requires them to touch the very parts of themselves they've been trying to keep buried since childhood. So in the moment, they shut it down. They dismiss the message. They tell themselves you're being dramatic, that it's all too intense. They need to believe that, because believing anything else would mean they have to look at why they can't receive real love. And most aren't ready for that. But later, when they're alone again, not just physically, but emotionally disconnected from the next person, who doesn't trigger intimacy, doesn't challenge their avoidance, doesn't remind them of you. That's when the silence gets loud. That's when your message starts to echo, not in words, but in contrast. They remember how they felt around you, the safety, the depth, the irritation they once felt now reappears as absence, as ache, because no one else has said those words since. And more importantly, no one else has meant them. You see, your love wasn't just a romantic gesture. It was a mirror. It held up everything they were running from: their shame, their unworthiness, their fear of being known. But it also held up something they didn't know how to process, something they secretly wanted, something their body responded to, even while their mind was trying to shut it out. Acceptance, not the performative kind, not the "I'll accept you if you text me more," but the real kind. I see who you are, and I still want to connect with you. And that's the kind of message that waits in the background until the noise of their avoidance wears off. The avoidant brain isn't wired for immediacy in intimacy. It's wired for delay, for time bombs, for slow realization. So don't be surprised if you never hear from them again. Don't be surprised if they move on quickly, get into something surface level, or act like none of it mattered. But behind that performance, in the moments they aren't performing, they think about what you said, not because they want to fix it, but because they finally felt it. And here's the part no one talks about. Avoidants often replay those moments in their mind alone, not to punish themselves, but because that message marks the moment. Someone loved them without trying to fix them, and walked away without making it a war. That contrast, it hurts. Quietly, privately, permanently. So when your heart wonders, did they even care? Know this: they might not have cared then, but they do now. And they'll carry that truth, your truth, with them far longer than they'll admit. Because it's not just a message. It's a wound they couldn't feel until you were no longer there to explain it away. The nervous system doesn't lie. Avoidance may seem like they forget you, like they've erased the connection, like your words didn't move the needle at all. But the human body is honest in ways the mind never is. The nervous system keeps score, especially when love felt safe, and they weren't ready for it. So even if they laughed it off, even if they moved on overnight, even if they acted like you were too much, their body remembers what it felt like to be seen without judgment. And more hauntingly, what it felt like to lose that. You see, the avoidant nervous system is built around defense. It's not about cruelty. It's about survival. Somewhere in their early life, maybe subtly, maybe traumatically, they learned that closeness wasn't safe, that love meant losing themselves, that vulnerability would only invite rejection, obligation, or engulfment. So their system wired itself to protect, to suppress longing, to hide need, to disconnect when someone gets too close. But here's the thing. Your message didn't appeal to their logic. It bypassed it. It wasn't calculated. It wasn't emotional blackmail. It wasn't a threat to leave. It was just true. And that's why it landed. Because the nervous system doesn't respond to manipulation. It responds to authenticity. And yours was real. You didn't chase. You didn't scream. You spoke your truth with steady hands. And then you let go. You said, "I see you pulling away, and I love you enough to not chase you through that door." That's not a threat. That's presence. That's maturity. And to an avoidant, that's terrifying. Because the moment someone stops chasing, stops over-explaining, stops trying to prove they're worthy, the avoidant loses control. And that's when the body finally reacts. Not with words, but with a feeling they can't shake. A restlessness, an echo, a quiet ache they can't name. But that shows up in the silence after you're gone. You see, the body remembers. The calm in your voice when you stopped begging. The sadness in your eyes when you knew they wouldn't come closer. The dignity in your goodbye. And the more emotionally detached they try to become, the louder that memory gets. Because nothing haunts the avoidant more than the person who didn't try to break down their walls, but simply stopped knocking. In neuroscience, there's a term, implicit memory. It means memory stored in the body, not through conscious thought, but through felt experience. That's what your message became. Not just something they remember with words, but something their body associates with a moment of truth, with warmth, with loss, with the sensation of being deeply known and still chosen. That doesn't go away. Not with time, not with distraction, not even with new relationships. In fact, especially not with new relationships, because now they have a comparison, and they don't even realize they're measuring others against someone they claim to forget. Avoidants aren't haunted by you. They're haunted by the feeling you left behind. That subtle sense that someone once saw every part of them. And instead of running, you stayed until they made staying impossible. And even now, their body remembers what it felt like to be loved without performance. So when they hear a song, or smell something familiar, or meet someone who says something that echoes your tone, their chest tightens, not from longing, from recognition. That's what makes your message unforgettable. Not the words, not the drama, not the heartbreak, but the truth. And truth lives in the body, long after the mind tries to delete it. The power of your truth, said calmly, clearly, once. It's not the long messages that haunt them, not the essays, not the breakdowns, not the 20 missed calls and paragraphs pleading for answers. No, what echoes in the mind of the avoidant is the truth spoken calmly, clearly, and once. That kind of truth slices through their emotional armor in a way chaos never could. Because emotional reactivity can be dismissed, it gives them a role to hide behind. You're overreacting. You're dramatic. You're unstable. But calm truth? It gives them nothing to fight, nowhere to hide, no excuse to use as a shield. And that's what makes it powerful. Maybe you said it gently. I love you, but I can't keep begging you to love me back. Maybe you said it with steady sadness. I don't want to be in a relationship where I feel lonelier than I do when I'm alone. Or maybe you simply stopped explaining altogether, and your silence said everything for you. Either way, it landed. Not right away, not when you hoped it would, but deep, in the quiet places where avoidants store what they can't face. Because the truth is, you weren't trying to change them anymore. You were just telling the truth. And that's what broke the pattern. Avoidants are used to people trying to fix them, to force closeness, to decode them, chase them, wait for them. But you didn't do that. You offered something rare. You spoke your truth not to convince them, but to honor yourself. That's why it haunts them, because it wasn't about punishment. It was about clarity, and clarity is unforgettable. When someone says something out of rage, we question their intention. We look for exaggeration. We hear their pain, but not always their truth. But when someone speaks in calm sadness, it registers differently. It lingers. It doesn't demand. It doesn't accuse. It simply stands there, honest and unmovable. Avoidants are not strangers to conflict. They're strangers to truth that doesn't need anything back. And that's what you gave them. The reason your message echoes so deeply isn't just what you said. It's how you said it. No panic, no push, no pressure, just a quiet knowing. A moment that said, I'm still worthy, even if you can't come closer. To an avoidant, that's a confrontation with something they've run from all their life. The idea that someone could leave without making it a war and still love them on the way out. It messes with their wiring because they expected you to rage, to beg, to fall apart. And you didn't. You stayed still in your knowing. And then you walked. That's not just a memory. It's a marker. And every time they meet someone new, that marker shows up, not to compare, but to remind them, this is what it felt like to be known. And this is what it cost when I couldn't receive it. Even if they never say it out loud, your voice shaped them, not because you yelled, but because you didn't have to. You trusted that your truth would echo on its own. And it did. So if you ever wonder whether they think about you, stop wondering. They do, but not in the way you think. It's not about missing your presence. It's about being haunted by your clarity. That one moment, that one line, the tone in your voice, the way you didn't raise it, the way you didn't apologize for having needs. It imprinted on them. That's what stays. Because avoidants forget many things, but they don't forget the one time someone saw their mess and didn't try to fix it, didn't run from it, didn't cling to it. They just let it be, and then let go. Why there's silence after you isn't peace, it's processing. You might think their silence means peace, that they've moved on, that they're untouched, that your message vanished into the air like it never mattered. But that's not silence. That's processing. And for an avoidant, processing doesn't look like reflection. It doesn't look like crying at night or reaching out to say sorry. It looks like distance, distraction, numbness, trying to forget something that refuses to be forgotten. See, the avoidant nervous system doesn't feel safe with closeness, but that doesn't mean it doesn't crave it. It just learned that intimacy comes at a cost. So when you walk away with dignity, when you stop pleading, when you speak a message they can't unhear, their silence is their only refuge. Not because they're at peace, but because they don't know how to make sense of what just happened. Because no one ever loved them like that. No one ever left them without punishing them first. No one ever looked them in the eye and said, I want closeness, but I will not betray myself to keep you. So they go quiet. They go distant. They try to reclaim control. But internally, their world starts to unravel. Because their usual story, you were too much, you were needy, you were emotional, doesn't hold up this time. You didn't fall apart. You rose up. You didn't chase. You released. And in that stillness, they hear everything louder. Your tone, your honesty, your steadiness, your sadness. It echoes, not in their mind, but in their body. And that's what they're trying to silence. Avoidants don't just run from people. They run from feelings. And you stirred feelings they can't file away. Because what you gave them wasn't control. It was clarity. And that clarity doesn't match their narrative anymore. So now, in the quiet after you, they're not peaceful. They're processing the dissonance. The tension between what they told themselves about love and what they felt with you. Maybe they jumped into another relationship. Maybe they buried themselves in work. Maybe they post like everything is fine. But their silence doesn't mean they're healed. It doesn't mean they've forgotten. It means they're trying to suppress the part of them that knows your message meant something. And that's not peace. That's confusion. That's grief they don't know how to name. Because grief for an avoidant doesn't always show up in tears. It shows up in restlessness, in emotional flatness, in that uncomfortable feeling they get when nothing seems to land anymore, when even new connections feel thin, because now they know what depth actually felt like. And when you've tasted real, you can't go back to fake, no matter how numb you pretend to be. So no, their silence doesn't mean you didn't matter. It means you mattered more than they could handle. And now they're sitting with that, slowly, privately, without language for it. Because emotional growth for avoidance doesn't happen in loud realizations. It happens in still moments, in the quiet, in the tension, in the memories they try to outrun, and always come back to your voice. Because you didn't just give them love, you gave them a mirror. And now, in their silence, they can't look away. You didn't need to be chosen to be the one they remember. There's a cruel illusion that being remembered only belongs to the ones who were chosen. That if they moved on, forgot you, or didn't come back, your story somehow didn't matter to them. But that's not how emotional impact works. Not with avoidance. Not with anyone, really. Because being remembered is not the same as being chosen. And sometimes, the deepest imprint comes from the one who left with grace, not from the one who stayed at war with themselves. You didn't need to be there forever, to be unforgettable. And maybe you've doubted that. Maybe you've asked yourself, did I matter at all if I wasn't enough to change them? But love was never supposed to change someone. It was supposed to reveal them. And that's what you did. You showed them their limits. You showed them the mirror. You held up a light, not to shame them, but to say, I would have stayed if you were ready. And that light doesn't disappear just because you walked away. It follows them in every almost connection, in every new partner who doesn't touch the same depth, in every quiet moment where their own choices echo louder than your voice ever did. Being remembered is a quiet kind of power. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand. It just lives inside them. Because you didn't manipulate. You didn't fight to prove your worth. You didn't punish them for being broken. You loved them. Fully. Softly. And when they couldn't meet you there, you let go. Not because you stopped loving them, but because you finally started loving yourself more. That. They remember. Not the drama. Not the ending. But the way you stayed before you left. The warmth you gave. The words you said. The silence you carried. Not out of coldness, but out of peace. That kind of love isn't forgotten, even by the most emotionally avoidant hearts. It doesn't matter if they're with someone new. It doesn't matter if they never say your name again, because this wasn't about getting credit. This was about your truth being a turning point, a moment that marked their life in a way even they may not understand yet, and maybe they never will. But some echoes don't need to be named to be real. Some ghosts don't need to be seen to shape the room. You were that shift, not the storm, but the stillness after, the one they didn't know how to hold, until you were gone. And yes, they might live a life without you, but it will never be the life they could have had if they'd met you with the same openness. And that quiet realization, that almost, that's the part that lingers. That's the part they carry forward. That's the thread they pull at when nothing else feels right. Because maybe they didn't choose you then, but you were still the one they felt most seen by. And that's not something the nervous system forgets. So don't confuse their silence with peace. Don't mistake their distance for closure. Don't think that just because they didn't chase you, they don't feel you. The avoidant won't show it. They don't know how, but they remember. Because something in you spoke to the part of them that wants to heal, even if they aren't ready. And when that kind of message is delivered, it stays. If they ever heal, it'll be because of the way you left. There's a kind of goodbye that doesn't slam doors, that doesn't scream or beg or demand closure. It just ends, but it ends with clarity. And that kind of ending, it doesn't break the avoidant. It plants a seed, because if they ever heal, if they ever sit with themselves long enough to stop running, it won't be because someone finally broke down their walls with pressure. It'll be because someone loved them without trying to force their healing timeline, and then walked away when the love was no longer safe to hold. That's you. You didn't destroy them. You disrupted their story. You left without betraying your softness, without making them the villain, without turning your love into a weapon. And that's what they'll return to, again and again, in their mind, in their body, in the quiet ache they can't name. Avoidants don't heal through confrontation. They don't grow by being pushed. They evolve through discomfort they can't escape. Discomfort like the loss of someone who felt like peace. And that's what you were. Not chaos. Not intensity. Peace. A kind of presence that didn't demand anything but truth. A kind of love that didn't collapse when rejected, but simply walked away with dignity. And that's what lives on in them. Not because they lost a partner, but because they lost a mirror. One that showed them what real connection could feel like, if only they were willing to risk being seen. So if one day they do heal, it will be because your love didn't push them. It invited them. And your absence didn't punish them. It reflected them. You didn't have to teach them a lesson. Life is doing that now. Silence is doing that. The absence of your warmth is doing that. The hollowness in their new connections is doing that. And one day, maybe not soon, maybe not even out loud, but in a moment of honest reckoning, they'll think of you, not as the one who hurt them, but as the one who told the truth before they were ready to hear it, as the one who held space for something deeper, and didn't wait around forever for them to step into it. That memory won't fade. It will soften. It will humble them. And if they ever get brave enough to grow, to sit with the parts of themselves they've avoided for years, it will be because someone like you loved them in a way they couldn't yet receive. So don't regret your message. Don't regret your vulnerability. Don't regret the truth you left them with. It wasn't lost. It just needed time. And if they ever become the version of themselves that's ready to love openly, you'll have been the reason they even knew such love existed. You didn't get the ending, but you were the beginning of something in them, something they can't ignore forever. You were the message, and it still haunts them, not as pain, but as possibility. And that's something no silence can erase.